Good crowd here this morning. Thank you all for all being here. Haven't yet had haven't finished my first cup of coffee yet, so we'll try to get through this. The photo frame here. Welcome to our last candidate forum before the primary election. Don't forget to either mail or turn your ballots in. You have them all by now, I'm sure. So that's an important civic duty, civic role that we all have as citizens. And we are fortunate to have that ability in this country to choose our government. So we will victimize, I think, Bob Forsberg to lead our pledge this morning. Bob, would you mind leading our pledge?
We've done it before. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We'll dispense with Sherry's thought this morning because we'll hear a lot more from her in due course.
We'll get some thoughts.
And thank you to all the candidates for being here this morning. As always, this is a service that this organization performs to have a fairly freewheeling exchange of ideas, debate, maybe even some controversy from time to time. We need to make sure to give the newspaper a good headline, and we intend to do that this morning as well. Are there any announcements from officers or committee chairs of the organization before we get going? I don't see anybody leaping out of the chair to do any of that. Nope. Okay. Andrew, is there a motion?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, due to the number of candidacies and the importance of this race to our organization, I move that we extend the meeting pursuant to the bylaws to 8:45.
Seconded.
Moved and seconded. Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Just a personal moment to add my remembrance of Ryan Mullane, a good friend of many of us in this room. Had a wonderful memorial for him at City Pier yesterday, or over the weekend, I should say. And it was a lovely time of remembrance. And I personally am going to miss him greatly. If he wasn't an Irishman, he should have been. He had such a great sense of humor. Okay, I'm going to turn the morning over to our moderator, Mr.
Never a
Hendricks.
mic.
Never a mic. Okay.
How about a mute?
There we go. Never that either. Ladies and gentlemen, members and guests, multiple candidates, member of the press. Good morning and welcome to another beautiful day in Port Angeles. And it's a spectacular day. We here get to watch the only candidate forum for a community development director in the entire nation. And there is probably no other office in this county that has more of a direct impact on the business climate than would the Director of Community Development. So this organization is keenly listening to this debate. As we ask you, we are going to listen to these candidates' opening statements, their philosophies on development, and the answers to your questions so we may vote wisely. With that said, I don't want to take up any more time. Let's introduce quickly our candidates. First, Kevin Russell. Kevin, good morning.
Good morning, Andrew.
Jesse Major, good morning. One of our own members, Sherry Kidd, good morning. And finally, Bruce Emery. Good morning. We've modified the rules here a little bit because of the number of candidates. They'll be limited to a 4-minute opening this time, followed by, if they wish, a 1-minute response or rebuttal. We'll then go to questions. Keep 2 things in mind. First of all, questions comes from the members first. It's one of our greatest privileges. And all questions should be directed in a manner that every candidate can answer. I've also going to do something a little unusual. I've informed the candidates. This time, rather than the unlimited amount of time, I'll be on you to make sure that you stay on topic, don't drift or become redundant, or I will move to the next candidate. This is so we can get as many of your questions in as possible. I followed how the paper has listed the candidates announcing this thing, so we will start with, I gotta remember that. We will start with Bruce. Right, Bruce, you have 4 minutes, please.
Well, good morning. My name is Bruce Emery, and I am running for the Director of the Department of Community Development. As a precursor, the Director of the Department is a highly technical position. This is in part because not only do they oversee building, planning, stream keepers, and other functions, but they are also to serve in an advisory capacity to the Board of County Commissioners so they can make reasoned, informed decisions on land use policy and regulation. Part of the obligation of the director is that they have an understanding not only of what state law requires, but also what case law requires. The guardrails that our society has put up in terms of making decisions in Washington State on land use. That also is important because that also means that they will understand the opportunities that exist within that framework to make the kind of decisions that we need in Clown County. I have 14 years experience with the department as a land use planner. I've been here for 30 years. This is my home. And for the first 14 years, I worked with the department up until 2007. I supervised current planning staff as a senior planner, so I have that experience of actually directing members of the department. I've done all phases of land use permitting, so I understand shorelines, critical areas, subdivisions, and zoning. I was the recipient of the Excellence in Service Award for 2006. In 2007, I was recruited by Green Crow Properties to work in the private sector as a project manager. I received my MBA in 2012. During my time with Green Crow, I served on 7 boards of directors for homeowners associations, which, if you're a representative of the developer in a homeowners association, you know what politics means. And in that process, I was able to turn hostile situations into productive working relationships. That's what I bring to the office. I think that the department is at a precipice at this point in terms of moving forward. We are all aware of the problem with housing accessibility and housing affordability. And there are things that we can do in that regard, and I believe one of our first questions deal directly with that, so I won't spend time on that. But other things I'd like to see happen in the department is I want to see a reestablishment of the working relationship with the Board of County Commissioners. Again, the director serves as an advisory person to the board on land use matters, and it's important that they work cooperatively together so that those decisions can be made properly. I also want to reestablish the department, both the support for the staff, which I believe is the county's best asset. It should be fostered. The professional development should be fostered. I know they want to do a good job. They just need leadership in order to do it. And in many respects, they're already doing that. So the job is half done. What else? There's a ton of other things to discuss, but I suspect they're going to come out in the questions. So I'm going to digress and let someone else have a shot at this.
Okay, thank you, Bruce. Sherry, please, take 4 minutes.
Okay. Good morning. It's such an honor and privilege to stand before you and be running for office of a Director of Community Development for our community. What an important position. I take this very seriously. I am qualified to be a candidate for this position because I have 16 years serving this community in land use development, zoning issues, comprehensive plan. I served on the Planning Commission. I was chair of the Port Angeles Planning Commission, and that's exclusive, dealing with zoning, land use issues, land development, a rezoning, comprehensive plan. And then I was very fortunate. The Port Angeles City Council was incorporated in 1890, and I've been honored to be the first woman that was elected to 3 consecutive 4-year terms. So I have served 12 years on your Port Angeles City Council, and I was honored to serve as your mayor and your deputy mayor. But I chaired many important committees that helped our community grow. Many important committees that worked for business development. I was chair of I worked hard to save our William Shore pool. I happened to be in the right place at the right time as a new council member when they wanted to close down and demolish our pool. I refused. And I worked hard, and it became a public park district, and then I served as a founding commissioner member, and look what we have done. Not only have we saved our pool, but I have to take credit. One of the smartest things I ever did was to participate in hiring Steve, because he just is brilliant as managing the pool. And look what we have, a community asset. But that took time, it took effort, it took a community member that really understood what the community needs and where we need to go. I have worked hard, I'm a business owner, and so I have worked with the planning department on many occasions. If sometimes I have more than 4 minutes, I want to tell you about my $50,000 toilet that we put in our remodeled house on Bean Road, and the $11,000 in permitting costs it took to get the sewer and the hookup. So I'm aware of the difficulties of business development, and so I have an oversight, an overview on how to approach and deal with making business possible, helping you to grow. I was born and raised in Port Angeles. My family's been in business here for decades, but I've learned community service. This is a position of leadership I have established for years. I've worked with the county commissioners on boards and commissions, and before I went to file, I went and talked to them, because we have excellent commissioners, but I want them to know that I will continue a cooperative and collaborative relationship with them. What's missing right now in the department is leadership. What's missing is the communication between departments. What's missing is a community leader that grows the department and gets things done. Right now, we have a void of leadership. A void in the community, a void in the department, a void in the city, county courthouse. I'm here to bring that leadership. I'm here to bring that experience. I'm here to expand businesses and keep our environment healthy. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sherry. Kevin, please, 4 minutes.
Thank you, Andrew, and thank you all for giving me this opportunity to address you. I know many of you. I've had an opportunity to address this body on several occasions as I've been invited to talk about building issues. So I come before you for this election for one reason. This is a job interview with the community to earn your trust and support and respect to lead the Department of Community Development. Why do I feel like I'm the ideal candidate? Background. We first came here in 1997, my wife and I. We bought property. We began to start our lives here. I started my first company in 2003. So, for purposes of the Department of Community Development, that first company was building. I've been involved in building now in this community for 20 years. I've had 3 successful construction companies. I still have one today. The question has come up, will I continue to have it if elected? No. I'm going to retire, so there will not be any conflict. But I have that experience. I've led our local building association twice as its president for 2-year terms. So I have that experience on the building side of it. With that, I also started the first Built Green program in Clallam County. Some of you were in that body. Paul, I think you covered it. We worked together in the community to bring that. So there's some experience there. I also started Built Green of Washington State, experience with building. I hope the distinction of having a Master Certified Green Professional as issued by the national body. So more experience there. Prior to coming here, I was a corporate executive. I managed a large group with a large budget. The Director of Community Development has 23 staff right now and almost $3 million in budget. I've managed budgets, I've managed large staffs. I understand how to do that. Part of the Director of Community Development is code enforcement. I'm retired from the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department. I have a lot of experience in law enforcement and code enforcement. I've worked with our code enforcement people in Los Angeles, certainly can work and lead the group here. The director needs, as my colleague says, experience. This is a technical job, absolutely. I have experience in planning and developing. We developed the first low-impact development neighborhood in Clallam County when I was with the Building Association on our Future Builders program. So I know how to do that. I've developed my own plots of land and houses to sell. So I know how to do that. I'm constantly fighting the battle for affordable housing and attainable housing as I still sit on a state board. I'm in the fight at the Olympia level. I'm in the fight at the DC level. So this job requires someone that's got a background of experience that's wide-ranging, a depth and breadth. It is the director position. I have been a director before for a large computer education company. I understand what it means, and I'm interested to hear your questions. So thank you very much again for the opportunity.
Thank you, Kevin. And finally, Jesse, close us on the openings with 4 minutes.
All right, well, thanks for having us all here today. This is great. So my name's Jesse Major, and I am running for Director of Community Development. I grew up in Port Angeles, graduated from Port Angeles High School and Peninsula College, and then went to Pacific Lutheran University in Tacoma and earned a bachelor's degree in journalism. From there, I entered the news industry. I worked at the Peninsula Daily News as a reporter, and actually attended many PABA forums, so I know to be prepared for a good 2-part question from Kai. I brought my pen and paper. But also as a reporter, my primary beat was covering county government. It was there that I developed a strong understanding of how our county government functions, and I developed strong working relationships with our Board of Commissioners, as well as with other local, state, and federal officials, and with agencies throughout the community. Just before COVID, I accepted a position as a code enforcement officer in the Department of Community Development, and so I'm actually the only candidate here with any recent experience in the department, and that was enlightening. As a code enforcement officer, I saw firsthand where our policies are not working. One of the and we're going to be talking a lot about affordable housing and housing affordability for low-income and middle-class citizens in this county. So I'm not going to belabor that. But as a code enforcement officer, I found myself enforcing a law that causes homelessness, that made the problem worse. Under Clallam County Code, it is actually a criminal violation to have someone stay, a family member, friend, whoever, or supplement your income, to stay in an RV on private property, even if it's hooked up to septic, and no one's causing any problems. I should never have been in the position where I had to tell a veteran who served our country that the only housing he could afford was illegal. This section of our code is also problematic because if the county were to take legal action, the way it is written is unenforceable, and we likely wouldn't prevail. I also found as a code enforcement officer, it was difficult to ask small home-based businesses to comply with county code. If they don't fit exactly with what our county code says is permitted outright on their property, small home-based businesses have to go through the same conditional use permit process as a major development, costing around $3,000, and with a owner's process that culminates with a public hearing in front of a hearing examiner. If we do what just about every other jurisdiction on the peninsula does, which is create a separate conditional use permit process for small home-based businesses or other minor developments, we can easily cut that cost by $1,000. And I think there's more room to cut. If you look at the city of Port Angeles' cost for the same permit, it's closer to $500. Though they did tell me they haven't updated it for many years. I'd also like to mention, so you'll hear a lot about experience today. I'm honored to be endorsed by Palm County Sheriff Bill Benedict, the top law enforcement official in the county. I'm honored that he believes that I have the knowledge and experience necessary to lead this department, and I'm looking forward to everyone's questions.
All right, thank you very much, Jesse. Bruce, would you like a minute to expand on anything?
Well, just that in addition to my 14 years experience with the county, I have over 15 years experience on the other side of the counter as a project manager, and that gives me a unique perspective of how the department works and its impact on the development community and the community at large. And I believe that that is a valuable understanding for the director position.
Very good, thank you, Bruce. Sherry, would you like a minute to add anything, please?
Yes, I'm running for Director of Community Development. The planning department has 6 planners that are technically educated or experienced. I'm running for Director, which is a leadership position. I've worked with planners for years. I'm providing the leadership necessary and experience necessary for this position. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Sherry. Kevin, anything to add? Okay, and Jesse?
Looking forward to questions.
All right, well, with that said, the PABA, as you know, has all sent you a question. We lead off with that. We are acutely aware as a business community that if we can't get affordable housing, available housing, it's hard to either retain our workers or to get them to come here. With that said, what policies will you suggest to the county commissioners that will better allow the private housing market to increase the housing stock for Clallam County workers at or close to our median household income, which last year was estimated at $51,995. Kevin, we will start, or Jesse, we'll start with you.
Yeah, so affordable housing is a huge challenge that we're facing as a community, and unfortunately, there's no silver bullet. We need to do everything we can think of to start bringing these prices down. One of the first things we can do that will have some impact for individuals, but is expand our catalog of approved building plans for a modest 2 to 3 bedroom house. This won't make a huge impact, but it will, for certain individuals, it could be what they need to help them get started. But we also need to focus on our infrastructure. And that means applying for grants so that we can actually expand our infrastructure, like the CDBG and CHIP grants. And as I was doorbelling and talking to folks, I was also telling them we need to reach out to Derek Kilmer's office to see what funding is available. And Jefferson County actually just got over $5 million to expand their sewers. We need to be looking for that funding as well. That's more of a longer term solution. We also need to be looking at our zoning. What areas are zoned for multifamily? If you look at Gales Addition.
So do you have specific things you would recommend to the commissioners to do?
So, yes. So, like I said, we need to be applying for those grants, and the director needs, as these grants become available, the director needs to be working with the commissioners so that we can actually be applying for them, that we have not been in recent years. We also need to advocate at the state level. The energy code has created challenges with not a massive benefit that we'd expect for those dollars. there's also a state program for property tax incentives for multifamily and affordable housing. Unfortunately, they excluded counties like ours that are 170,000 in population or less. It's things like that that we need to be doing, advocating for our county, working with the commissioner so that we are applying for the grants that are out there that we have not been applying for, and as I mentioned, the pre-approved building plans. It's something we can do now that we do have control over, but it certainly is not the silver bullet.
Very good. Kevin, what would you recommend to county commissioners to help with our housing stock, especially for our medium income folks?
So the very first thing that I would recommend to the county commissioners is support candidates that are gonna go to Olympia that are gonna help fight the many onerous rules and regulations that we, the building industry, are governed by, and that you, the community, have to pay. To be specific, to answer the question, I would approach the commissioners and I would suggest that we revisit zoning so that we can get housing in areas in the UGA, the urban growth area, the Lamret, local area of more intensive rural development that has infrastructure in water and septic. That would lower the cost. However, there is no panacea, no magic bullet. We're not gonna find it. There's nothing to go to the county commissioners and say, remove this. We can have a catalog of plans. It saves a very small amount of money while taking away living from some of our people that are designers. But going to them, what would I suggest? It's simply, how can we bring development closer to the infrastructure that will lower that cost? That's it. Other than that, there is no magic bullet, unfortunately.
Okay, very good. Sherry, same question. What would you forward to commissioners for the housing market?
Yes, before I filed for office, I actually went to visit with each county commissioner and visit with Mary Ellen Winborn, and I asked that specific question: what can I, as DCD, bring to you? What do you want me to bring to you? And I was told about a very efficient proposal by Mary Ellen Winborn was a housing needs assessment from east to west. She brought in preparation for our upcoming comprehensive plan review in 2025. She came before the county commissioners with this housing needs assessment proposal. Unfortunately, I wasn't there, but the conversation didn't end in mutual agreement. The commissioners are asking questions, what are the deliverables, and anyway, the conversation didn't end in completing the proposal. So, but they would like to have this proposal back and presented to them again. And so I would go over that plan and make sure that I understood what their answers to the question are, so we can discuss it and I can explain to them what the deliverables are. So the cost of the program was $80,000, and it is something that they want presented to them. Other things that we can do is, at some point, we're going to have to deal with looking at policies for Airbnbs. And it's not reinventing the wheel. Other communities have dealt with it, and we have to look at issues like what we have some out-of-state investors buying up homes, taking them off the rental market in Port Angeles and renting them out as Airbnbs. An out-of-state investor is less likely to vote for our school bonds, to vote for our local bonds for our pools and our libraries and our fire departments. So we'll have to look at that together. There are, I agree with Kevin. I have working relationships with our legislators. We have onerous, continuing, stringent building codes coming at us from every direction. We need to work with our legislators and try to get some relief from those. So there's many, many things to, and I'm ready. On day one, I'm ready to go to work and present good options. Thank you.
And Bruce, round off the question here, what would you suggest to our county commissioners to help with the housing crisis?
Well, I think first and foremost, we examine the current zoning situation in the urban growth areas, which is the unincorporated parts adjacent to cities where we can actually have urban development. That's under the direct control of the county. And I believe that we should re-examine zoning and eliminate onerous controls, density controls, not for a free-for-all, but to open up for innovation so that businesses, so that developers can come in, and when the conditions are right, they can do things like apartment development, which we haven't seen in a very long time in any appreciable degree. And the city is actually leading the way on that in Port Angeles, and even in Sequim, they're starting to re-examine their single-family residential zone, which is you know, sounds good for a utopian ideal, but it's not very good for creating the kind of housing stock that we need. The problem is a supply problem. We don't have enough houses, and it's not just here. Nationwide, we're down about 4 million houses from where we should be, and that automatically jacks the price. It's a simple supply and demand. So there's that issue. It's been touched on briefly too, doing a lands capacity analysis. We have to do an update under the Growth Management Act for our comprehensive plan. And to re-examine the boundaries of the urban growth area, you have to do a lands capacity analysis based on numbers from the Office of Financial Management at the state level. We've been seeing a lot of growth in the area. Those numbers are going to be pretty high, and they're going to justify a generous expansion of the urban growth area. But that also doesn't happen in a vacuum. You also have to secure funding for infrastructure expansion, urban services. It does a developer no good if they have a nice piece of vacant land that doesn't have sewer, doesn't have water, doesn't have power. If elected to the position of DCD director, one of my primary objectives will be to get 2 full-time long-range planning staff who also are dedicated to writing grants. There's a lot of opportunity out there. One was just mentioned about the sewer over in Jefferson County. Why let them have it? Why can't we have that? Why can't we have economic development? I looked at numbers with Danella Pratt earlier this week. There are over 300 potential lots sitting in just 2 locations, Gales Addition, and I forget the other one is on the west side of town, that currently don't have urban services, where there's people in there wanting to do subdivisions, but they can't do it because the urban services aren't available. So those are the kind of limits that we see. Another thing that I think we need to move ahead on is an RV ordinance. And this isn't a long-term fix, but I know the Board of Commissioners were interested in pursuing this, and it was well on its way, but then they hit a snag with environmental health, who was unsure how they could handle managing the potable water and, more importantly, the sewage disposal requirements. But people are already using them. And because of that, I think it behooves the county to get out in front of it and provide some relief for people who have no other means except a tent, and that is unacceptable.
Okay, thank you very much. Now my favorite, excuse me, now my favorite part, questions from our members. Ty, do you have you'll sneak in 2 questions on this one maybe.
DCD has a significant role, I believe, in balancing competing interests. Property rights, interests in builders and homeowners of having lower building costs. On the other hand, environmental considerations, fighting climate change, combating urban sprawl. I'd like to get your philosophies more broadly than just affordable housing, where you see the proper balance, and specifically in this county, are we over or under regulated? If elected, would you propose to add certain regulations, or would you propose to eliminate certain regulations, and which ones would those be?
Kevin, you get to lead off with that simple question.
Bang. Thanks, guy. So, a lot of what I've said since I started this is, how do we address the housing situation while maintaining our rural culture? As we just talked about, urban growth area, that type of thing. How are we gonna bring housing costs down? We, the DCD, we in the department are bringing them down. We're gonna do it by the supply of materials. I don't see that coming down soon. We have to do it with regulation at the highest level, and that is to lower tariffs on our lumber. Randy probably can go into a lot of detail on that. But do we see that on the horizon? So is there an answer, as I said earlier? No, there's no exact answer, but we have to explore all options. Going to Olympia, we're working right now, the BIAW, to lower some of the energy code regulations, which will bring some of the housing down. We have a need for housing, but we also live in a beautiful rural environment. We have to find that balance. How do we find that? We get out and we talk to you. We ask you, what do you want? We ask you, what do you want? What do you see? What do you see this community as? Do you want the commissioners to expand the zoning to allow more urban growth as it goes out? Is that what we see? Or do you want to keep us where we have our urban growth around the city centers, where the immediate availability of infrastructure is there, yet we still have our culture out and about?
And I think to Kai's question, he's asking you, what do you see to that question you just proposed?
What do I see to
That, do
the
we
balance?
expand it? Do we increase the UGAs?
I think it's very important that we hear from what the citizens want, what the community wants. I have no ego in this as the director. We're gonna be working for you, as I said earlier. This is a job interview with all of you. What are your expectations? So one of my proposals is to have an open house every 6 weeks and have the public come in, use the commissioner's meeting room, and hear, as well as get out through the media. What do you want? What are your expectations? We need to do, as Bruce mentioned earlier, a lands analysis. We need to go through and see, what can we do? What can't we do? What are we regulated by? To answer, Kai, your question, do we need more regulations? Absolutely not. We are over-regulated already. We need good common sense approach to how we are going to find this balance. Thank you.
Very good. Jesse, same question. This balance between our quality of life, regulations, expanding, decreasing regulations?
Yeah, well, thank you for your questions. You're right. We do, a large part of this position is striking that balance between property rights and the other interests of our community. I think an example of where we are going to run into that balancing act is as we address VRBOs and Airbnbs. There certainly is, we need to protect the property rights. We need to think about the interests of property rights as we're addressing this issue, but Airbnbs make up there's about 1,000 Airbnbs throughout our county, and when you look at census data, that's a little over 2% of our housing stock. And when I hear about outside investors coming in and buying up a bunch of properties, I find that troubling. But I also haven't seen the data on that. I think one of the first things we need to do before we take action on that is collect data so we know what we're actually dealing with. And then we can actually address that issue. And as far as regulations, I think there are plenty of opportunities to clarify our codes to address things that are going on now. An example is if you look at our codes where they talk about camping, RV parks, and outdoor recreational uses, when we developed these sections of our code, we didn't foresee things like hip camp, how things would be changing in the future. I think there's an opportunity to clarify those so that we have some regulations so that people who do have hip camps, if they're meeting certain standards, they do not have to go get a conditional use permit, but if what they're doing does have an impact on their neighborhood, certainly they would go through that process so that the neighborhood has a say in what's going on. And of course, there's also the environmental regulations we have in our codes. I think during our comprehensive planning process, I anticipate that we'll be looking at that. I couldn't tell you today if our buffers are adequate. I certainly don't see us reducing our buffers, but I would look to the science to determine if we are adequately protecting our critical areas such as streams, rivers, bluffs, erosion zones, things like that. And again, and Kevin has talked about this a lot, is we need to be advocating at the state level when these regulations come down from the state that have such a big impact. There's a lot of things we don't have control over, like when ecology tells us about stormwater. I'm getting the death glare, so I will take my seat.
Very good. Sherry, same question, this balance that we're trying to achieve.
Wow, we're so overregulated, and it makes it difficult to build. I own had 12 acres on Bean Road, and I tried to redevelop 5 acres, but stormwater costs were so onerous. I was trying to put up storage units. It wasn't a gold mine. I couldn't, it was just out of sight. So I had to drop the plans to redevelop storage units, and we rehabbed an old house. And but when I served you on this Port Angeles City Council, and every 3 years the international building codes would become more stringent and more stringent. And we had local builders come to the council and saying, this is overkill. We already have safety measures in place. This will add thousands of dollars to every house that's built. And I said, then I'm going to vote no. And our city staff said, but we have to pass this or we won't be current on our International Building Code. The International Building Council is out of the I-5 area. They don't consider our needs. It's a one-size-fits-all, and it doesn't fit our community. It's too onerous. It constrains our building. Now, we have energy codes to deal with. So let me tell you something that I would suggest as your DCD. I bought some property next to my commercial property, and I went in for a rezone so I could develop it. Your rezone application must be into the county by September 30th. We have a shortage of engineers in our community. NTI went out of business. The engineers that we do have are very, very busy. And if you can't get a phone call returned and you can't get your paperwork done because the engineer has you at the bottom of their stack, then we missed the September 30th deadline to get our application in for rezone. Well, that's okay. You can get in it by next September 30th next year. That's not efficient. Our comprehensive plan says we can only change the map once a year, but there's nothing that says the county has to only accept rezoning applications once a year, and if you miss it, you have to wait till next year to stand in line. They should be able to accept applications at any time and act on it when it's appropriate. And there's one small thing I'd just like to bring up quickly. I was looking at the building codes that I would think we need to look and see where we can be more lenient in our building codes. A building permit shall expire upon completion of the work authorized by the permit or after 2 years from the date of issuance. Then, if you want to renew it for an additional year, you can pay 50% of the original fee. Hey, things take longer now. I would eliminate that 50% of the original fee and make it 3 years, and then we'll review, and if there's administrative costs. But fees are so high, why would you charge somebody 50% if they need more time? I want to work to make things more efficient. Thank you.
Very good, thank you. And Bruce, the balance, what are you gonna do as the DCD director?
I love this question because it gets to the heart of what we're doing. In short, land use regulation attempts to balance the collective right against the individual right. And that opens up a whole litany of discussion. There's powerful feelings on both sides of that equation. But we also have case law, history of regulation, not only in Clallam County, but perhaps more importantly on the state level and the federal level, which kind of creates guardrails under which we operate. I look at regulation more or less as chemotherapy. The patient had better be sick before you apply it. And if you misapply it, you're only going to make them more sick. And if they're not sick, they're going to get sick from it. In other words, it has to be tailored. It has to be surgical. It has to be well thought out. We see it often when regulations are thrown into the mix that there's a rush to solve a problem, but in doing so, you create unintended consequences. The issues that we're faced with now, trying to solve like global warming, for example, or climate change. We have an energy code in Washington State that every 3 years gets more and more onerous. Now, it's a great thought, great concept, but at the same time, we're in a state where our primary source of energy is hydroelectric power. It's not generating greenhouse gases. Now, I still think buildings should be efficient. I don't think we should waste energy, otherwise we're going to have to come up with other sources that may be more onerous and problematic. But when you look at what the code is requiring now from the state level, we're getting to the point where the return on investment, picture a J-curve, all right? And the vertical is the cost and the horizontal is the return on that investment. We're getting to the point where those returns are so minor that they can't even be measured by the people who do efficiency monitoring. And yet those changes can cost $5,000, $10,000 per house. So, I mean, in January, you leave your door open while you're bringing your groceries in, you've just kind of floated away all that savings that was intended to be generated from that regulation. The point is, haven't we gone far enough in some of this stuff? Can't we push back? I think, philosophically speaking, that Clallam County, between the Board of Commissioners, the Director of DCD, and other interested groups, should be one consolidated voice lobbying in Olympia to make the changes that make sense. Other things that I've heard, which, by the way, all good ideas, I don't dispute any of them. I do think that an example, Sherry had spoken about the rezone process. That actually is a state requirement. A jurisdiction is only allowed to review their rezones at one time in a given year so that the full impact of that change can be evaluated. So there's some onerous requirements imposed upon us by state and federal laws. Some of them well-intended, some of them actually with good intent, but we still have to work our ways within that level, and I'm seeing the look, so
There you go.
I digress. I'd love to keep going on this one, by the way.
All right, next question.
All right, so this is going to deal with code enforcement. Number one, as a DCD, how important is code enforcement going to be to you? And then number two, following Kai's footsteps, two-part question, what should qualify someone to be a code enforcement officer? What type of background do you think they should have?
So Sherry, we start with you, code enforcers. How important is that? And what are the qualifications of such a position?
Code enforcement is very important. I absolutely support it. And as DCD, I will go out with our code enforcement officers to see exactly what situations are happening so I'll truly understand what's going on in our community. Code enforcement, we live in a beautiful place. Most people's greatest investment is their home and their property. You don't need a garbage pit next door to you. You don't need your neighbor piling up garbage, and our environment doesn't need the issues that we've seen, people carelessly just piling up garbage that affected our streams and our soil and our neighborhood. So code enforcement, we have policies in place. We have policies in place. As your director of DCD, I will enforce those policies. We don't need new regulations. We've got them. We just need to enforce them properly. Now, we have to do it with education and cooperation and respect when you're going on someone's private property. You don't storm the place. You go in and you need to offer help for the neighborhood, and you need to get cooperation. And then I call it my frog in a pot theory. You put the nice froggy in the warm water where he's comfortable, but as you continue to turn up the heat as needed. So code enforcement is essential. What are the qualifications? I would have to discuss that with Rich still. I haven't hired code enforcement. That's part of the working with the human resources manager. But we need to be fully staffed in code enforcement. It needs to be fully active. And I would really like to add some community volunteers as our eyes and ears in the community to help us find areas and work with areas that we can let volunteers help us solve this issue. Thank you.
Very good. Bruce, same question to you. How important is code enforcement? What, if any, qualifications should there be for that position?
Well, I think code enforcement is one of the pinnacles of the whole program. It is, and it's also essential to establish equal protection under the law. Otherwise, all we're doing is regulating honest people, and that kind of gets me in the gut. That said, it's not easy. It has a high turnover rate. There's a lot of conflict involved. As far as qualifications, I think immediately you need people who are well-versed in land use regulation and at least familiarity with building code. But I also don't think that it's DCD's role alone. I think it needs to be done in concert with environmental health. I think it needs to be done in concert with the sheriff's office. The problem is when you go into some of these areas, it's usually more than one issue. And you need the flexibility and the expertise available in order to deal with it. I think there needs to be training also. This is part of the professional development of the code enforcement staff, so they become familiar with techniques, with safety. I've heard stories from the folks. People have guns drawn on them. There are situations where they have to make a call. Do we have a sheriff come with us? Is this going to be dangerous? Are we driving down a long dirt road with someone who has a history of non-compliance? Those are the kinds of things that code enforcement has to deal with. As DCD director, you're also responsible for their safety. So I believe that would be a paramount concern in there. But I do think training is critical. Giving them the tools and the techniques for safely administering the code, coming to solutions. The best approach is to get compliance. And if you can do it without cost, without onerous requirement, then great. Then we all go our happy way and they move on to the next case.
Jesse, as a former code enforcer, how important is it? What should be the qualifications?
It is very important. So yeah, as a code enforcement officer, I saw the importance of having a strong code enforcement program. And unfortunately, when I got into the program, we only had part-time officers. I eventually made it to full-time due to staffing issues. As people were leaving, I got more hours. And now we have one full-time officer and a part-time officer. The commissioners have been pretty vocal about wanting a strong code enforcement program, so I would work with them to address staffing. I also think we should have a manager of code enforcement. Currently, code enforcement is accountable directly to the director, and there isn't really a chain of command. As to qualifications, when I was in that position, I saw the need that people who are doing code enforcement should have some sort of legal background, whether they're former law enforcement, maybe a paralegal, or have experience in land use. You are out there enforcing county code, and every decision you make creates liability for the county. We need people who can make those decisions. And you've heard a bit about training. I could tell you there's not a lot of training. You go figure it out. That's a problem. We need to support our code enforcement officers so that they have adequate training. Also, moving forward, I I could see a different format for our code enforcement program where, so under our code, different sections are enforced by different departments. The junk and septic issues are under the health department. Sheriff's office certainly has jurisdiction over other issues. We need to be working together, and I could foresee an environment where our code enforcement, we have a multi-divisional program that are all working in the same space, working together. I leveraged my relationships with the other departments so that we did work together, but we did not work in the same space. We had meetings. I think the program would be more effective if the departments were working in the same space and working together.
Very good. Kevin, as a former law enforcement officer, how important is code enforcement? What are the qualifications, if any?
Thank you. It's a great topic, code enforcement. We need it to maintain the quality of our life and to keep our community safe. So I agree 100% that we need code enforcement. One of the greatest things to do in enforcing it as former law enforcement is by educating people and gaining compliance rather than coming down hard. And there's nothing better, I know, working the streets, pulling up to a place where somebody's breaking a law, might be a minor law, educating them, and then they walk away happy because they're not going to jail, now they know. That's what we need to do here. I look at it as opportunities to help our citizens understand what are the problems from whatever they have, why were we called out, educate them. Most people want to do the right thing. Those that don't, then you gain compliance. And the final is take action. So you do that by using the different agencies. We all talked about using the sheriff's department, health department, things like that. We have a lot of tools available to us. It's just finding the right people. As to the education component, I think people are pretty smart. Give somebody the proper training and give them an opportunity to do the job. Supervise them and make sure they're doing the right job. Rich Sill, we all know Rich Sill, County Administrative Officer. He ran code enforcement. He had a great program. Community-oriented policing, COP or POP, problem-oriented policing. And what he did is he brought in volunteers that had previous law enforcement. So I'd like to bring that program back. Bring those folks in, use them to help tutor the actual code enforcement officers. Bring in more code enforcement officers, dedicated code enforcement officers. Give them the support of volunteers that have a background. Give them the proper education, and also educate the public. We have a new robust code enforcement program. This is what we're going to look for. Let's see if they can get out ahead of the problems. So thank you very much.
Very good. Next question.
But time is limited, and I find myself really unhappy this morning. Why? Because we have 4 great candidates in front of us. It's really tough. Each of you has a lot of unique skills, and I wish we'd use all of you. But my question is really simple. Which of you will commit to lowering permitting costs?
There we go, and we start, let's see, with Bruce. Will you commit to lowering permitting costs?
Good question. I think that there was a philosophical change back in the late 90s, actually earlier than that, but it started kind of with the Growth Management Act, and one of the mantras that came out of the act was that make development pay its fair share. And unfortunately, that translated into make development pay for all of it. And we're seeing the results. This actually dovetails into the first question, really. Why do we have an affordable housing problem? Because infrastructure costs a lot. It used to be that in America, the government would handle that. Yes, they would have to use tax dollars, but they also had reasonable rates back then, and they were able to extend services, and it made it available to development, and our communities were able to grow through the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and then it starts to get into sort of a change. And I think that part of it is to push for a philosophical change in that relationship. When I was at the county, a conditional use permit cost $350. There were complaints about that. Why is the government supplementing these permits? Well, this is all part of the same discussion, isn't it? that to what degree do you want development to be responsible? And at the time, they were saying, fully, we want DCD to be self-funded. That makes sense too, because that means it reduces taxes. But you begin to see the trade-off. The money has to come from somewhere. And I believe that there needs to be a recognition and maybe a slight reversal. And I don't know where that threshold is, but I would sure love to have that discussion where,
Now,
yes.
I don't want to keep Brian unhappy. Would you commit, yes or no, to lowering?
I would
permit
absolutely
costs?
commit to it with the proper discussion. Do I know where that number is? No. But I would love to have that discussion with the board.
Okay. Jesse, would you commit to lowering permit costs?
Well, since I already talked about lowering permit costs, yes. In particular, there's an opportunity with the conditional use permit. If we create a separate process for minor development, we can reduce that cost. I would also want to look at the cost of permits at other agencies throughout our region to see where others are at. I know if you look at the city of Port Angeles, their big conditional use permit is closer to $1,000 than our $3,000. And I think I said this before. They did tell me that they haven't updated it for many years, but part of that reason, the reason for that, is they want to encourage development. I would look for opportunities to reduce permit costs with our commissioners in the areas where it makes sense, where we want to see certain types of development, whether that's looking at reducing costs for multifamily, helping with infrastructure costs, but we also have to fund that. So I would work with the commissioners to find a way, where possible, to reduce permit costs in the areas where it makes sense. I don't know every permit that would be at this point, but that's something I'd be looking at.
Very good. Kevin, would you commit to lowering permit costs?
Brian, I'm gonna ask you for clarification why you're unhappy. Is it building permit costs or the totality of permitting?
I've had complaints from every aspect, from septic to construction. You know, you've probably heard them too.
Okay, so no, I would not commit to it without having detailed conversation with the Board of Commissioners, because that's a revenue stream that helps support the DCD. And I will tell you this from experience, because I built all over the state of Washington and I consult outside of the state. We have some of the very lowest permitting costs anywhere in Clallam County. So without knowing exactly what effect that would have, I would not commit. Now, that said, certainly look at every avenue and opportunity there is to lower those costs. Absolutely. But I'm not gonna stand here and make a promise that I can't keep without knowing all of the answers. I have a budget, I just not have drilled down that deep to see where that money goes. But I can tell you, we have the lowest permitting costs. Some of the permits, as Jesse pointed out, Bruce, conditional use permits are high. We need to revisit those, bring those down. Some of the permits are out of whack, we have to look at them. But until we put everything out there, I cannot say to you, yeah, I guarantee we'll do it. That's a long discussion. Thank you very much.
Very good. Next question.
No.
Oh, I'm sorry, you're right.
Andrew, you.
I got it, sorry.
3 answers, yes, yes, and yes. I already have submitted an example of where I would start. If you have a building permit that has been authorized and paid for, it's good up to 2 years. But if you need a little more time, you get to pay another 50% penalty to extend it a year. No, I don't think so. I think we should give you that extra time, and then if there's an administrative cost at the end of another year. We are taxpayers. Did you get your bill from the county? I did. You're paying your taxes. That supports our county government. That supports Department of Community Development. We're already supporting them tax-wise. Let's look at our permitting. I paid $11,000 in permits for my toilet in my house on Bean Road. And I put in sewer down Bean Road. Now, that's something else. It's in the UGA. I'm dealing with the city and the county because it's the UGA. We need to coordinate the instructions for the getting permitting between the city and the county, because you go to the county, they say talk to the city, you go to the city, they talk to the county. That's something I want to tighten up. But yes, I'm going to look at permitting. I'm sure there's ways we can cut it.
Now I was trying to prematurely get to a question from our treasurer, please.
Colleen?
Colleen over there, I'm sorry.
Thank you. There's at least 11 states that don't have any building code requirements. That our state is not one of those. And the North Olympic Legislative Alliance between Jefferson and Clallam counties are looking, and we have a lobbyist that is prepared to lobby for one housing focused item. What would you recommend that we direct our lobbyists to lobby on to the legislature regarding housing issues?
Here we go, Jesse, you start. What would be your recommendations to state legislation?
Well, first, I'd be really interested in looking at those 11 states. I'm not familiar with them, so I'll look into them right after this. But the energy code is a challenge, and that's something that I could see needing addressed. As you've heard, yes, we need to support having high efficiency homes, but at some point we just don't get the return for investment, and that's something that I believe needs to be addressed. Stormwater is another huge issue that I hear a lot about. Thankfully, Clallam County was successful in the ecology wanted the East UGA to be a phase 2 stormwater permitting, and we thankfully were able to avoid that. But typically, as you know, ecology tells you what you're doing, and you do it. So it's probably coming down the pipeline at some point, and I think we need to revisit those requirements, because what works on the I-5 corridor does not work here, and those costs, and that just massively increase the cost for people who don't see the return that we want to see on that.
Very good. Kevin, same question. What would you recommend, if anything, to the state legislators to help?
Such an easy question. Well, they can't do anything on stormwater because that's federal. These are all questions that we work on all the time at the state level, the BIAW. So about the only thing your lobbyists might be able to do is get a rollback of energy, which I think is going to be impossible in office. It's just not going to happen. Stormwater, we're not doing anything there. We tried. I brought a program forward, and we took it to DC. They told me flat out, it's not going anywhere. It's never going to happen. So I think the only place we have, and we're working on with the State Building Code Council, is to look at getting a slowdown on the energy code, because that is a land of diminishing returns that puts a great deal of cost on a house. I would look at that. If there was one other that I would talk to, look at this group here right now. Everybody in here is concerned about our community, our culture, our neighborhood. Get us disconnected from the I-5 corridor. Stop with FutureWise governing what happens to us out here. We're adults, we're business owners. We should be responsible for our county, not somebody sitting in Seattle or Tacoma simply because they outnumber us. You know, one size does not fit all. We know what's best for out here. That would be the thing I'd lobby for. Stop having people elsewhere tell us what to do. Great question, thank you.
Sherry, same question. What would you recommend to state legislation to help us out here?
Well, we've been fighting stormwater for 20 years and haven't gotten anywhere. I think we really need to push back on the new energy codes. I think it's overkill, and we need to look at specific areas we can work with our legislators, because the added cost to every home is just, when they add $20,000 for the new energy efficient homes, when they add thousands and tens of thousands of dollars for the new International Building Code. And when stormwater on properties is so big that many projects can't continue, but I think right now we need to fight back on the energy codes. They're too stringent, and they're, again, what's the ROI? It's just creating so much cost that it's creating an unaffordable situation.
And Bruce, you get to finish our questioning here. So, what would you, if anything, recommend to state legislators?
Reduction in energy requirement, stop the bleeding. We're not getting any return for the investment, but we are losing affordable housing in the process. Regarding stormwater, that too is an issue, but Department of Ecology really legislates or promulgates rules out of necessity from court decisions. And I think it's a little more difficult of a battle. But energy code, there's a rationale. There's a rationale in our favor, and I don't think we give up hope. The zeitgeist right now may not allow for it, but eventually it will. Just keep driving home, and have our legislators lobby on our behalf. Don't get me wrong, I think that global warming does need to be dealt with. Climate change is an issue, but we're not really solving it with the energy code. That's the problem. All we're doing is costing ourselves unnecessarily and getting nothing for our return. We should demand something for our investment, and that's why I think that should be dealt with.
All right, very good. So before we go to closing, as always, no matter who you vote for, I think it really deserves our admiration if anybody wants to run as a public service and put themselves out there. So please, round of applause for our candidates. With that said, we're going to go to 1 minute close. Bruce, you're on.
Well, I said it before and I'll say it again. I have experience on both sides of the counter. My experience with the county basically gave me full understanding of the role of the county, the role of the DCD director in serving in an advisory capacity to the board. Since that time, I've only gained experience in the impact that the regulatory community has on the development community and the community at large. I believe that's what makes me the most qualified and best suited candidate for this position. That's why I'm asking for your vote. Thank you.
Thank you. Sherry.
We have a huge void of leadership in our county courthouse for the director of community development. It's a leader for the community, and I have 16 years experience at the director level, as leadership level. I'm the only candidate that has public service. I have a long history of community service. I can show you that I stuck to my guns until we got safety fences on the bridges. Took me 10 years, but it stemmed the suicides. We have a great pool. We have a wonderful downtown waterfront, but I am running for Director of Community Development. Have a business. I have dealt with the county many times. I'm aware of the obstacles to getting permitting. I'm a community servant, and this is community service for me. I'm dedicated. I will work day and night. You know I will, and I would love to be your Director of Community Development, not the planner, not the code enforcement officer, but the director of the department that incorporates all of us. Thank you for this opportunity to be with you.
Thank you,
this morning.
Sherry.
Thank you.
Thanks, Andrew. And thank you again for this opportunity to go through this job interview with you. I bring you balance, respect, and a desire for community partnership. Your vote is earned, it's not given. My resume is wide and it's deep. I have the experience, I have the background, and I have the leadership ability to do this job. So I invite you to look further at my website. If you have any questions, please call. These are great questions. Unfortunately, we don't have enough time to go on and on, but I appreciate it. So, thank you again. Take care.
Thank you, Kevin. And Jesse, you get to end this forum. Please, your minute close.
All right, well, thank you again for having us here. I think we had some great discussion, and PABA always has some of the best questions, so I appreciate that. And I'm not just saying that. You guys have some really good questions, and we did have great discussion. Look, as a code, like I said before, as a code enforcement officer, I see where our county code is not working and where we can make changes to benefit our community. As a reporter, I gained a unique experience that will help me as director. So I'm looking for your vote, and if you have any questions or want to look for more information, go to my website, jessemajor.com, or find me on Facebook at jessemajor4DCD. You all have my cell phone number now. And again, thank you.
Very good. Mr. President, a minute late. Sorry.
Thank you very much. Again, thanks to our candidates. You didn't make my job any easier this morning to try to figure out who I'm going to vote for, but I have some ideas. Takeaway for me, not a question, a takeaway. I need to ponder the difference between nuisance abatement and code enforcement. To me, listening this morning, those two are separate things, and the proper organizational model to accomplish both. Public service announcement, Todd Ortloff show this afternoon, candidate forum for Mike Chapman, Sue Ford, and Matthew Rainwater. Listen in, I intend to. Next week, Jim Buck is going to be with us talking about school building, earthquake resilience, and state funding for same. Thank you again for being here this morning. Have a good rest of your day.